for February 23rd, 2023. My name is Julie McLeod. I'm the Assistant Communications Officer for Washington County, and my pronouns are she and her. Thank you all for being here with us this evening. We'll give people just another minute to get settled and then begin. Welcome everyone just joining us for the Board of Commissioners' first town hall of 2023. We're going to move forward with a brief orientation in the Zoom space, and I'd like to ask our interpreter Victor to share that information and direct our Spanish speakers on how to join the Spanish channel and get Zoom set up for interpretation. So Victor, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I will start with instructions in Spanish and also I will share them in English. Sí, muy bienvenidos a todos. Tenemos inglés y español disponible para esta reunión. Así que si está ingresando por medio de una computadora de escritorio o una computadora portátil, va a haber un icono en la parte inferior de su computadora que dice interpretación. Por favor, haga clic ahí, de ahí puede seleccionar su idioma de preferencia. Igualmente, si está ingresando por medio de un dispositivo móvil, ya sea una tableta o un teléfono inteligente y está usando la aplicación de Zoom, van a haber 3 puntos en la parte derecha, en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla, o puede ser también en la parte superior derecha de su pantalla. Y de ahí va a poder seleccionar un nuevo menú donde dice interpretación de idiomas. Si desea escuchar la reunión en inglés, por favor seleccione inglés, o si prefiere español, seleccione español. Y así de esa manera va a poder escuchar todo el contenido de hoy. Si tiene alguna pregunta, por favor notifíquenos, ya sea por medio de levantar su mano o tal vez por el chat, y vamos a hacer lo mejor posible para ayudarle. Muchas gracias y muy bienvenidos.
Recording in progress.
Welcome everyone. English and Spanish will be available for this meeting. So if you're joining us through a desktop or laptop computer, please click the globe icon that is located at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation. And from there, you will be able to select your language of preference. Similarly, if you're joining us through the mobile app, such as using a smartphone or a tablet, there will be 3 dots with the legend more at the bottom right-hand side of your screen or upper right-hand side, and there will be a new menu where it says language interpretation. If you want to hear the meeting in English, please select English, or if you want to hear it in Spanish, please select Spanish, and that way you won't miss any of today's content. If you have any questions, please raise your virtual hand or write it on the Q&A section, and then we'll do our best to help you. Thank you and welcome. Back to you. And
thank you so much.
Sorry, and just one more thing. There will be slides available that you can follow along. They will be available in English and Spanish, so you can go ahead and go through the county's website, and you'll be able to download them in Spanish, and you will be able to follow along. También similarmente vamos a tener las diapositivas disponibles en español en el sitio web del condado, así que las puede descargar y puede seguir la presentación en vivo con español. Muchas gracias. And I am ready to be assigned as an interpreter.
Thank you so much. It looks like okay, great. Let's get started then. We'll officially open the meeting this evening with the reading of the land acknowledgement. Washington County Land Acknowledgement, as prepared by representatives of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, Nez Perce, Siletz, and Yavapai. We want to acknowledge the people on whose land we live, the Atfalati Calapooians, also known as the Tualatin Band of Calapooians, the first inhabitants of Washington County. We are grateful for the land we are on, Calapooian land. Signers of the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855 were removed from their homelands to the Grand Ronde Indian Reservation. Today, their descendants are tribal members of Grand Ronde and Siletz tribes, carrying on the traditions and cultures of their ancestors. We acknowledge and express gratitude for the ancestors of this place and recognize that we are here because of the sacrifices forced upon them. In remembering these communities, we honor their legacy, their lives, and their continuation in our community. Please reflect on the role government has played in the painful colonial history and reflect as well on the resilience and healing of the Indigenous land and communities. We would like to invite everyone to collaborate and work together with the tribes to take care of the land and water and the people who inhabit these spaces. And now I'll just briefly orient everyone to our meeting norms and ground rules. Your thoughts and ideas are very important, and the board invites your input and feedback. We're committed to maintaining a safe and respectful space here this evening that honors diverse perspectives. And in order to create an opportunity for everyone to participate, we ask that you keep to a limit of one question or comment per person during the Q&A periods. And now just a quick overview of our agenda this evening, and we'll try our best to keep to this agenda tonight. Right now, we're just wrapping up our welcome and orientation, and then the Board of Commissioners will introduce themselves. I will mention that Commissioner Rogers will not be attending tonight as he is out of town. So next, we'll have Chair Harrington kick us off with an overview of county services, board principles and priorities. Then our Chief Financial Officer, Greg Munn, will give us a high-level overview of the county budget, the challenges we're facing, and strategies to balance our general fund. Toward the end, I'll touch briefly on the budget development process for the next couple of months, and then the board will wrap it up around 7:30. We'll also pause a few times to make sure we address your questions. Please wait for those Q&A pauses to pose a question or make a comment in the Q&A section of your Zoom screen. With that, I invite each board member to introduce themselves now.
Julie, before I start that process, I happened to notice that in the Q&A section, there were a couple of questions about logistics for this evening's meeting. So I just wanted to bring that to attention in case there's any information you would like to share at this point.
So thank you for asking that question, Chair Harrington. We do not have the technology capability to provide real-time subtitles as the chat request had asked. We will put that on the list to explore further. So we really appreciate our participant community member for raising this so we can explore how to do that. Subtitles will be available after the YouTube is live on YouTube for accessibility.
Great. For the behind the scenes Q&A, answering and dismissal, that'll be great to take care of. Thank you so much, Ms. Angie. I appreciate that. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine Harrington. I'm the elected chair of the 5-member Washington County Board of Commissioners, and I am delighted that you're sharing of your time with us today. I am joined by my fellow commission colleagues, and I'm just really interested in hearing what your questions and comments are as we continue our journey in this proposed budget cycle. And now I'll turn it over to Commissioner Nafisa Faye.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. Can you all hear me? Okay, perfect. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nafisa Faye. I am also one of the electeds for District 1. I'm happy to be here tonight and look forward to starting the conversation about our budget and the county's financial challenges and what that looks like and how we can problem solve together. So I'm excited for tonight, this conversation, and look forward to seeing your questions. And just want to say happy snow days. I love snow days.
Good evening. My name is Pam Trace. I'm Commissioner for District 2 in Washington County. I'd like to thank everybody that's on the list. The list continues to grow of participants, and I see people I've had many conversations with, and I see many new names as well. So thank you for attending. Thank you for being a part of this discussion, and I look forward to hearing your input. Over to Commissioner Willie.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Trace. Jerry Willie, Commissioner for District 4, which I always expound as the best district. It's the Western District, so it's a combination of 6 cities and all of the rural area out west, touching 4 other counties. So thank you, everyone, for taking this time. This is a very important conversation we're having tonight. So I appreciate the fact that you're taking a little bit of your evening time and joining us tonight. So thank you.
Next slide. So as Julie mentioned, this is just a quick summary of the information that I will be presenting on. And after I go through a short set of information, we'll also pause for questions. So if you have any questions about the information that I'm sharing with you, we'll try to answer them then. So without further ado, before we go further in our program, I want to make sure that each of you is aware of the process that we're following. What you see in the blue section of the screen over on the left-hand side, we're currently in the development stage for building the proposed budget for the next fiscal year. All that you see here shown with the blue background. This is an internally focused part of the process. Our county administrator and also our budget officer, Tanya Angie, who is here with us tonight, is obligated, required under Oregon budget law to produce a balanced proposed budget for the budget committee to consider. She and all of the managers in the county organization are working right now to develop that balanced budget. In the meantime, our Board of Commissioners has invited each of you to participate in this evening's town hall. This is the 4th time the board has devoted its agenda for our town hall meetings since 2021 to the topic of the county budget. We're so pleased to share this time together with you tonight on this important topic, because it's about how we deliver services for you. The green section, or the section on the right-hand half of that diagram, shows the remaining steps under required Oregon budget law, all part of our usual public process. The county administrator, also our budget officer, will submit a balanced proposed budget to the budget committee on April 27th. So we're not there yet. The budget committee is made up of each of the 5 members of the Board of Commissioners, plus an additional 5 members of our community who have been appointed from the public. For each of the budget committee meetings listed here, our staff will present that proposed budget section, and the budget committee members will be able to ask questions. And you too, members of our community, will have the opportunity to make comments. The budget committee will hold a public hearing and take a vote at the meeting on June 1st about whether to approve the proposed budget. The last step involves just the Board of Commissioners holding a public hearing, so another public meeting, and taking a final vote at our meeting on June 20th about whether to adopt the budget. Next slide, please. So first, a little background on what are these services for the community that we're talking about, the Washington County budget supporting. Well, your county government, Washington County, works with many partner organizations in providing services to you, our public. But there are some services that only a county can provide. Who organizes the county fair each year? Who builds roads, sidewalks, and bike lanes within our county road system? Who do I call if my dog runs away? Who makes sure my vote in elections is counted? And who provides police services in our rural areas and our urban unincorporated neighborhoods? The answer to the questions is Washington County. Next slide, please. So here's a very brief list of the services that Washington County provides. And I'll take a little bit more time to describe them as we have time in this evening's town hall. But you can think of them in these 5 different categories that we refer to as functional areas or systems of service. First, general government. Like your county board of commissioners, the county administrative office, including our Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement and Sustainability Programs. Those are all in general government, but that's not all. There's the county council, our legal experts, the elections office, real subject matter experts that assess property values across the whole county and collect property taxes and disperse those to the appropriate organizations. Plus, there's providing internally facing services such as human resources, facilities, and information technology, like what we're using tonight. Then there's public safety and justice. I mentioned law enforcement patrol in those unincorporated areas. That's done by the law enforcement patrol of our sheriff's office. And that might be the most visible part of this public safety system that you're familiar with. But there's a lot more that goes on here. Our district attorney's office serves to prosecute those accused of crimes, and the sheriff's office runs the only jail in our community. So all of the cities use that county jail as well. But in addition, our community corrections and our juvenile services departments work to interrupt that cycle of crime, focusing on preventing crime through proven programs that succeed in turning people's lives around. Washington County also maintains the buildings in which the state's circuit court system operates. You might be familiar with the Washington County Courthouse. Then there's land use and transportation, another one of those functional areas. This is one that addresses growth and development while supporting mobility, safety, livability, environmental stewardship, and quality of life in a fiscally sustainable and responsible manner. Another area, housing, health, and human services. This area includes the systems focused on moving people who are experiencing homelessness into supportive housing, while also expanding the supply of affordable housing. The departments in this area also support people facing mental health challenges, those who are differently abled, veterans, as well as our seniors. Animal services and environmental protection are also part of this area. The last in the set we refer to as culture, education, and recreation. How many of you have a library card and use library services? Well, that's part of your county too. The West Side Commons and our annual county fair are also part of this area. And it also includes our county parks, such as Scoggins Valley Park, where Henry Hagg Lake is, one of the most visited recreational areas in Oregon. So there's that brief overview. Now I'm going to switch over to talking about the budget, specifically through the next slide, board budget principles. So as your county commissioners, we've had several conversations about principles that help guide the organization as Ms. Angie, our county administrator and budget officer, and all of her department managers help prepare the budget to support all of those services. So the board had several conversations to provide guidance to Ms. Angie and her staff. The first of which is supporting our goals and governance as a county government, to ensure we're enhancing meaningful communication with the public that is transparent and open. We also want to make sure that we're enhancing and evaluating our revenue, the resources we have to support the services, as well as our longer-term fiscal sustainability. So it's not just about this budget year or next budget year, but on into the future. We also are committed to implementing our services following equity. So we want to make explicit through the budget the investments that we're making in our equity implementation. We want to make sure that we fund mandated services, and we're mandated by the state and the federal government for a lot of those, and objectively evaluate the service levels that we can provide given those mandates and any funding that comes with them. We want to make sure we balance our long-term capital needs as well as our ongoing operational needs. We want to make sure we're positioning your county government, this organization, not just for the short term, but longer term into your future. We also want to make sure that as we go through budget challenges, that we protect the services that impact your daily lives. And lastly, we want to make sure that we balance having those systems of services while also pursuing a one Washington County approach, because we are one government with lots of pieces that needs to support you, our one community. So these principles were formulated by the board earlier this year and adopted by us as guidance through to our county administrator. And we wanted to do so before we received the balanced proposed budget from Ms. Angie, so that we provided some direction or guidance in the decision-making that she and her staff were going through to develop the proposed budget. Next slide, please. So a little bit lower down then is, with all of that said, how do we prioritize? So we talked further and crafted this set of priorities. And we're going to keep these priorities in mind when we receive that balanced proposed budget later this spring. So I touched on some of these from a principal standpoint, but these are the most important budget priorities. First, address immediate and long-term budget issues. We shouldn't just be delaying making some hard choices. We want to make sure that we fund the immediate needs for our are buildings or our facilities that are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days. And these buildings are specifically our public safety facilities. We want to make sure that we support the development of a new county community strategic plan. Our current one was developed and adopted decades ago in the 1980s, and we know we need to modernize. So we want to make sure we get that started. For our workforce, we're operationalizing Design the Future and One Washington County so that we are pulling together as an effective organization servicing you, our community. They're great employees, and we need to help ensure we train them for the job we want them to do and that they have fruitful and supported careers to do just that. We also want to plan for and respond to emergencies and disasters. Heck, look at us today dealing with snow and ice. So we also have those that are caused by climate change. I don't know about you, but I hope we never see another heat dome. Also, transportation, getting people, goods, and services moving all throughout Washington County is really important. So we want to continue supporting a connected, multimodal transportation system. Our community is very diverse, and we want to make sure that we continue to support equitable economic development through the federal rescue plan funds that have been made available to us as your county government. We also want to continue to partner with the state of Oregon as well as community groups throughout Washington County to continue protecting your public health. And boy, have we learned a lot about public health the last few years. We want to make sure we continue to support and expand affordable housing and address the homelessness crisis we have here in Washington County, in our metropolitan area, and our state. Public safety, I've mentioned it before. We want to make sure we deliver public safety and justice services in a way that builds community trust. And lastly, support major systems of county government, including our first ever capital improvement planning. Our finance systems have gotten a little out of date, and we need to make sure we're continuing to embrace new information technology and invest in human resources. So not only do we attract and retain valued employees, but that every single one of our over 2,300 employees has a good, productive, and fruitful career here at your county government. As I mentioned, we developed the principles and priorities as a guide for the work of Ms. Angie and her staff in developing that balanced proposed budget, which we'll all get later this spring. And I can't emphasize enough that these are a guide, and that as we, your Board of Commissioners, and our fellow Budget Committee members receive the budget, we'll continue to go back to these priorities in our decision making. So next slide, I'd like to pause here and ask for help from Julie and other members of our team to see if you have any questions on the information that has been presented thus far. Julie?
Yes, thank you, Chair, for that great overview and really setting the context for us. We are going to pause for questions. Just a reminder, if you have a question or comment, please use the Q&A button in your Zoom screen. And please observe the one per person guide, if you would. I do see there's a question in in the Q&A currently wanting to know what if the state has a surplus, why does Washington County have a deficit? I will assure you that we will get to that question, so I'm not going to have Mr. Munn respond to it now. But if you do have a question, please do utilize the Q&A button. We're thrilled to have so many people joining us this evening, and that's really the best way for us to manage questions that do arise. So Brenda, I'm going to ask you now if there are any questions that you see under the Q&A that need to be raised now, and Victor as well, if you have any from our Spanish listeners.
Hi, Julie and commissioners and attendees. My name is Brenda. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm a staff assistant to the board. There are two questions related, I think, to what Chair Harrington was just presenting. One of them is from Mary Manso, and the question is, why isn't continued effort for transparency a board priority?
So I'll take that question. I think this meeting tonight is an example of how the board has operationalized being open and transparent. As you can see in our principles, we have enhanced meaningful communication with the public that is transparent and open. We're feeling pretty good about how we have been going about evolving our systems over the last couple of years, and we know we will continue to engage with our community and offer all kinds of different forums for community engagement. So I think that is one reason why we didn't think we had to list it as a small set of primary priorities as we put these together. But thank you very much for that question. We'll keep it in mind as we move forward through this year's process and into next.
Great, and go ahead, Brenda, with the next one.
Melissa Laird asks, are the board budget priority line items in priority order?
No, they're specifically not priority 1, 2, or 3, but rather we know that there will be some choices that our county administrator will need to make in crafting the proposed budget. And so we thought these were important ones for us to provide in advance.
Any further questions for this round, Brenda?
I'm just looking through. There are a couple long questions, but I think they might pertain better to after Greg presents his section as they're related to specific funding and line items. So I think if we do the next section and then we can come back to these longer, more specific questions, if that's okay with folks.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach. Let's do that. So let's progress to the next slide. Thank you. And I would like to invite Mr. Munn to go ahead with his section.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. In the next few slides, I hope to give you a snapshot of the county's current budget situation. And as a grounding, as we move into discussing the situation or the budget status for moving into FY24 next fiscal year. So with that, this is a real high level picture of both revenue and expenditures for the county's the current budget that we're in now. The budget cycle begins July 1, so it began July 1 of 2022, and it ends June 30th of 2023. So for reference, you'll hear me and others say that is FY23. So that we're in the FY23 budget right now. So the county's overall budget, you can see in the slide, is $1.6 billion. And I'll just give you a few of the highlights here of what make up the revenue and the expenditures on that budget. So on the revenue side, you can see in the graphic there that taxes make up 16% of the revenue. This is largely property taxes. There are some transient lodging taxes that are paid by folks who are visiting the area through our hotels and other short-term rentals. We have intergovernmental revenues. Those are largely grant agreements with our federal and state partners. Charges for services, that makes up about 10% of our revenue base. And those can be anywhere from revenue that is charged for rental of a fleet vehicle inside the county to revenue earned underneath a contract from outside of the county. Interdepartmental, those are revenue relationships within the county, and operating transfers in those are funds that are coming in as a transfer that are not necessarily earned. They would be more like a transfer of a subsidy. And then beginning fund balance, that's where we start at the beginning of each year, and those are dollars that are carried forward from the prior fiscal year. On the expense side, the two biggest pieces we spend money on are people and things. So you can see that personnel services make up 22% of our expenditure budget overall, and 34% goes to supplies, materials, services, things of that nature. The operating transfers out there, that's 13%. Those are dollars that leave one fund and go to another fund within the county. And interdepartmental are department to department relationships where one department is buying something from another department. Next slide. So this is just another snapshot of looking at our $1.6 billion budget. This is more by functional area. This, instead of looking at the type of expenditures that we just looked at in terms of personnel and materials and services, this is looking at groups of functions. So at the top there on the right-hand side, public safety and justice, so a lot of people can understand that. That's our law enforcement, the jail, district attorney, those sorts of services. Land use and transportation makes up 8% of our overall budget. That's building permits, roads, and I'm oversimplifying that a little bit, but that's generally what it is. Housing, health, and human services, that's our public health, behavioral health, and housing services. That makes up 19%. Our general government at the top is largely, that 9% number is largely the administration of the county. Also included in there would be elections and our taxation and our county auditor. And non-operating expenses, those are simply transfers of monies in between funds. So they show up as either a revenue or an expenditure on both sides. So those are just movement of money within fund accounting. And then capital, those are the programs that spend money on things like roads. That's one of our largest expenditures, is the road system in the county. Next slide. So I'm moving away from the overall county budget of $1.6 billion down to just the general fund. And the reason why I'm doing this is so that it is really the issue we're going to be talking about from here on out has mostly to do with our general fund. So our general fund for FY23, the budget is $355 million. So roughly a quarter of the overall budget at the county. So when we're talking about some of our budget challenges, we're talking mostly about the general fund and not the other 75% of the budget in the county. On the revenue side, largely the source of revenue is property taxes. That makes up almost 60% of our operating revenue that comes in. And then transfers in is the other big component of 20%. Most of that is in the form of SIP revenue that is transferred in. We'll talk about that later. SIP revenue is transferred in to the general fund to fund operations. On the expenditure side, half of what the county's primary business is the people business. So we can't do our work without our great staff. And so that's where most of our expenditures go. Half of our budget in the general fund is personnel services, and that includes salaries, health insurance, retirement, things like that provide folks to work here. 14% is our materials and services, and then you can see the other components as you move around that little graphic there. All right, next slide. So let's talk about the FY23 budget real quick. And the reason why I want to touch on this is because it helps set up the conversation for FY24, which is the purpose, one of the primary purposes for tonight's conversation. So in the budget development process in FY23, it was discovered that we had a gap, a shortage in the general fund. And largely what we're talking about now, but it was discovered a little bit late in the budget last year. So there were, in the tail end of the budget development process, several actions were taken to balance the budget. This is we had a $31 million gap, and the reason why this odd looking graphic is on your screen is because it's a copy of page 15, which is in our budget document. So if you go to our budget document, you will see that exact piece of paper. And what that is a summary of the adjustments we made in FY23 to balance the budget of $31 million. That's about 9.6% of the budget for FY23. And it really was a stopgap measure that we needed to make to balance the budget. The difference as we move into FY24 is we've had more time to be more thoughtful in some of the decisions that we're making to actually straighten the budget out on a more permanent basis. All right, next slide.
Actually, we're going to pause right there, Greg, for a few more questions. Again, if you have a question or comment, please use the Q&A button. And I will say we're only going to address questions tonight, but be assured that if you're making a comment, those will be transcribed and shared with the board after this meeting. So Brenda, I don't think we're still not ready to answer that question about why Washington County is in a deficit when the state seems to have a surplus. But Brenda, what are the other questions that people have posed in response to Greg's piece just now?
Yeah, let's see here. So I'm not sure that those three questions are, I guess we can go like this. Let's go like this. Beth asked, given the billions of federal dollars that have become available to counties from the Inflation Reduction Act for greenhouse gas reduction and climate adaptation, is the board developing a climate action plan that will capture some of these funds for the benefit of Washington County? If so, can you give some details? If not yet, I urge you to do so.
And it looks like Commissioner Willie would like to address that question.
Well, that's not exactly true. I actually had a different point that I wanted to make, so I'm going to hit the pause button on that.
My apologies.
And that's okay.
I saw your hand up, so I jumped to a conclusion there.
No, I'm sorry, but go ahead.
Who would like to take?
Let me jump in first of all on this. The reason why I raised my hand is I think a couple of slides back, the most important slide and information there was the fact that we have projected expenditures from the general fund that significantly exceed our projected revenue income. And that's not because we have been spending more money than we have. It's because a number of factors come into play there that are beyond our control. And one of the things is our revenue source is limited to property taxes primarily. And property taxes, as we all know, are limited to a 3% increase every year. And certainly our inflation increases, as we've all experienced every time we go to the grocery store and everywhere else, has been significantly above that 3% level. So I think it's very important that we note that we are trying to balance a budget with limited resources and unlimited expenditures from the standpoint of how inflation impacts our budget. So that's a great slide, Greg, there. I appreciate that. That's been very revealing, and I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. And coming up, we will have another graphic that shows the imbalance. I believe County Administrator Angie is going to show the constraints that we do have on property taxes. Chair Harrington, did you want to address the climate change question? Oh, you're mute. You muted.
Thank you. Yes, and I would like to further expand on something that was presented as well. So first on climate change, thank you very much for your question and the input on that. Your Board of Commissioners continues to work with our staff on proposals for how we might address the challenges of climate change. I know we have a work session coming up in the May timeframe, to further discuss options with our staff. So you, as part of our openness and transparency, you have access to our meeting packets right on the Washington County website through our portal. And so stay tuned to those future work session packets. You can watch the meeting on Zoom, you can read the material, and after the fact, you can hear our input from the videos that are available all through our county website, which is washingtoncountyor.gov. And so know that we will be taking your input and comment both through the next steps on our proposed budget getting to adoption, but also with regard to the topic beyond that. Then I wanted to also touch on a part of your question with regard to the American Rescue Plan Act dollars. The Commission has been having conversations about how we take stock of how we've been using those dollars to date and how to make use of the second half, or the second tranche, as the Treasury, U.S. Treasury refers to them. And we'll be discussing those in future meetings as well. And you can find further or more recent information, even just this year, that we've talked about by doing a search on our meeting portal for ARPA. So that's how I wanted to contribute to addressing that question. But if I also could help expand a little bit on the information presented. Thank you, Greg, for what you have shared. And part of what you touched on was our different functional areas and the funding that we receive for that. Our property taxes and levies are that flexible funding through our general fund. But as you talked about, revenue from other resources, such as grants from the state and federal government, those often come with special purposes or restricted uses, what we refer to as special fund. So as Mr. Munn's slide talked about, only 25% of our budget is available with flexibility, without special terms. And many of those dollars go towards funding that county-wide service for elections, general government, and public safety. The other 75%, those are special purpose, special fund dollars that can only be used for a specific purpose. And we don't have much control over that. Certainly we apply for grant funding, whether it's for special public safety programs or court programs or transportation programs, but we have to make sure it's used just for that. So that's one reason why we spend the majority of our time talking about how we use the general fund dollars to provide a vast array of services for you. Thank you. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Chair. Brenda, what other questions do we have?
I have one more from Bob asking specifically what areas were the 31 million in? I think Bob is referring to slide 24 with the cuts from last year.
I can take that. If you could go back to that slide, that reference point there. So you may not be able to see this, but let me highlight a couple of these items that were made to make the budget balance in FY23. So one of those, and it's actually highlighted there in the bullet, was a $3.7 million in vacant positions that were frozen. And that was one of them. And I highlight that because we actually developed a monitoring tool to make sure that we were keeping track with that 3.7 million, and staff across all the staff that are involved in the general fund across the county we've held those frozen and then some to actually we're ahead of that $3.7 million target. We also included we did not make a normal transfer to help fund our IT technology infrastructure or our facilities group. So we did some one-time adjustments for that. So those are just a couple of items that we made adjustments for. I hope that answered your question.
So I'd like to also share in answering that question. Hello, Bob. It's good to see you again. And thank you for paying attention. Continue to pay attention to the work of the county. As Mr. Munn said, you can find the details on page 15 of the current adopted budget document available on the website. We did not cut any positions. We paused new hiring, so filling those vacant positions. We also paused making investments, certain discretionary investments, such as, you could see the first one listed under expenditure reductions. We did not make our annual $4 million allocation to ourselves, to one of our own funds, the Housing Production Opportunity Fund. We just decided that was discretionary. So in order for Ms. Andy, she gave us a balanced budget, which used these solutions. And we chose to continue with those recommendations in adopting our budget. So we took pauses on certain investments where we could, and in certain new hirings. So she delivered a balanced proposed budget, and we adopted a final balanced budget. And now we're trying to learn from that and figure out how we make longer term sustainable solutions rather than just those one-year solutions. Thanks for your question.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. I know there are a few more questions waiting, but I think we will continue on with the next section, and we will answer all your questions before we adjourn this evening. So, Mr. Munn, could you go ahead and touch on the challenges that you've been alluding to in the general fund?
Yes, certainly. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So probably one of the questions that most of you have is, how did we get here? What's caused this imbalance in the general fund? And generally, and I have a graphic here that'll show this here in a minute, but our expenditures have been outgrowing our revenue. But why? But what's a little bit deeper into that? We have a 7.7% growth over the last 5 years in expenditures versus just under 6% growth in our revenue. Well, part of that is we've had an over-reliance on one-time funds. And what I mean by that is we're using our SIP revenue, our strategic investment program revenue, which is limited in term. It's not ongoing, it's limited in term, to basically fund ongoing expenses. So that's one real reason there that we're talking about as we look through the budget process. Our health insurance costs, I think most of you know, or have at least heard and experienced it over the last 15 or 20 years, is growing significantly faster than it used to. Our state retirement system costs are growing at a much higher rate than inflation, or have been in the last probably 12 to 15 years. We also have unfunded state mandated programs that was mentioned earlier. So there are laws that are passed and new programs that are required. One of those, for example, which is a great program, is our Oregon Paid Leave Program. That alone, to administer it, it will cost the county about $450,000 a year. And that did not come with revenue. That's just a new expense that the county has to absorb to manage that great program. We also have some of our key facilities. We've done an assessment over the last 6 months and identified about $48 million in some of our critical facilities, work that needs to be done on these critical facilities. We're talking about the jail, congregate housing, some of our other our facilities that are having failing roofs. We have HVAC problems. Our water systems need attention, and those are items that we have not planned for in the past that we need to address now. Our Commissioner Chair Harrington mentioned our financial backbone system, our general ledger system, which is called an ERP. It is over 20 years old and needs to be replaced. You know, those are the things that allow us to be more efficient in our work and replace, or to be able to use technology in the place of labor as we move forward, do our work better. So the bottom line is, our initial estimate is that our general fund is 7.1%, or about $25 million out of balance as we move into the FY24 budget building process. Next slide. So this graphic really tells the story. This is a 5-year look back from FY22 back to FY17, fiscal 17, of our general fund. And the two lines that are most important to look at here, one is the red line, and that's the expenditures in our general fund. Those are actual expenditures. Those aren't budgets. Those are actual expenditures. And that has grown from FY17 to FY22 by an average of 7.7% per year. The other side of that equation, of course, is the revenue side, and that's your dark green line. And that has grown at 5.8% per year. So there's two things here that we're working on with our budget. One is we have a gap between the two, and the gap is growing. The expenditures are growing faster than the revenue. So those are the two primary pieces of our budget structure that we're working on as we move forward. Next slide. One of the key factors in the revenue picture that's helpful to understand is, if you remember back to the pie graphic that showed most of our revenue in our general fund comes from property taxes, is this. This is a graph that shows the tax rates between the 3 counties in the Tri-County area. Multnomah County is on your right, Clackamas is in the middle, and Washington County is on the left. And you can see that the rate for Washington County is at $2.25, $2.98 for Clackamas, and $4.34. Those numbers are very telling, particularly when you compare them with our actual population growth, because the curve on the population growth is actually inverse of that. And that's identified by the dots above with the percentage. So Washington County's over that same period of time has grown 58%, Clackamas 54%, and 39% for Multnomah. And I think Chair Harrington wanted to make a comment on this. Am I right?
I believe that was Ms. Angie that I had a note that she may want to weigh in here.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Julie and Mr. Munn. So many times I hear as county commissioner, why can't Washington County deliver X service that Clackamas County or Multnomah County delivers? And our funding sources are not the same from county to county. And our historic property tax rates, which we need to live within the revenues that we collect, are really depicted on this screen, and how services delivered in each county does differ, and how we need to prioritize the services that we can deliver within our current revenue framework. And so this is not to be meant from a standpoint of what we can't do, but just a realization of the construct that we need to work within. And my responsibility as your budget officer, the board's budget officer, to deliver that balanced budget and to ensure fiduciary sustainability as we move forward as a company. So thank you, Julie.
Go ahead, Greg.
Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So I think I have two more slides. This slide is what are we doing about the budget shortfall this year, and then we'll talk about what the counties will be working on in the years after this next year. So obviously the first exercise is to balance our general fund budget, and that's that 7.1% reduction that we talked about, $25 million in the general fund. So we are just at the tail end of departments submitting 3 different budget reduction scenarios, 4%, 7%, 10%. And those reduction scenarios apply to all services across any department, any function within the county that receives general fund support. It applies to them. So does the 4, 7, and 10 mean that's the only way that we'll be looking at reductions? No, it just gives us some options so that we may, in some areas, take a 10%, look at taking more of a 10% reduction. Others may be a 4%, or even in others be more focused and say that we will need to take maybe more of a deeper reduction there. The purpose of the 4, 7, and 10 is really just to give options that really point back to the priorities that Chair Harrington was talking about before to produce that balanced budget as we move forward. There's no way we can do this without an impact to service levels. So there's a general assumption that this will impact our service levels to some extent, although every effort will be made to minimize that impact. We'll actively, again, as we've done this year, is actively manage our staffing, particularly our vacant employee positions. And really the guiding light here is to continue to implement our best practices that are outlined in the Government Finance Officers Association guidance.
And Mr. Munn, I think Chair Harrington would like to make a comment.
Okay, you bet.
Thank you, Greg. And I have seen these slides before. They've been presented to the board, but it's interesting how through this community-wide evening, I'm finding that there are a couple of things that bear repeating. I wish that we had the title, instead of what immediate steps are being taken, that we had used a few more words, for example, to say, while the proposed budget is being developed, right? We're being very clear. We don't have a balanced proposed budget yet. It's still being developed. It's still under creation. So these aren't decisions. No decisions have been made. And I want to underscore that point. Rather, these are those internal techniques that I mentioned earlier that Ms. Angie, Mr. Munn, and all of the great staff at Washington County are trying out, what information they're collecting to form a proposed budget. Thank you. Let's keep going.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. That was great feedback. All right, next slide. So moving forward past FY24 and into the future, here's just a few of the bullet points we'll be working on in terms of budget. We need to resolve that unsustainable structural gap, both in terms of the difference between the revenue and expenditures and the growth differential. We need to work on and bring together a budget where our expenditures and revenue growth into the future are growing at the same rate. We would need to fully fund our contingency, the 4 months property taxes. That may not mean be real. I didn't explain that in any detail earlier, but best practice says we should have 4 months of property tax in our contingency. We don't have that, so we're moving towards that as well. We need to create a policy around the use of our strategic investment program funds. how much do we set aside for one-time expenditures versus how much do we utilize for ongoing operations in the general fund. We need to examine our Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program, known as MISTIP, and library funding practices that have been in place for 25 years or so. And we need to align our funding and services to mandated and desired community outcomes. This is part of a much bigger strategic planning effort that we're also working on now and moving towards. We need to find ways or examine ways to control our growth on our health insurance costs. How do we provide high quality health insurance to our employees in an affordable manner? And also developed practices and policies around reserves. What dollars do we set aside for what future investments, capital outlay, things like that? And create a capital improvement plan and funding options to address projects like the $48 million that we mentioned earlier. Of a side note, we have already started that capital improvement plan, and we are actually working to finalize that with the board here in the next couple of months and include that in our upcoming FY24 budget. Next slide.
Thank you, Greg, so much for that great information. We're doing really good on time, so I think we'll take a good 10 minutes to address the questions that are remaining in the space. And Chair, I understand that you were interested in addressing the question about access to a portal.
Yes, thank you so much, Julie. If you go to the Washington County website, that would be washingtoncountyOR.gov. When you go to that page, whether you're using a computer, a tablet, or even a smartphone, up at the top, you'll see a menu. And on your phone, you might have to select some lines. You'll want to choose General Government. Then under that, choose Board of Commissioners. That will change your web page to one that has that same picture of the 5 of us. And then there will be a big blue button for meetings and agendas. And that will take you right to our meeting portal, where for Board of Commissioner meetings, Planning Commission meetings, and other meetings, you can see on the calendar when they're scheduled, and you can get the meeting packets for the upcoming meeting or for past meetings. You can also choose to look at the videos for different meetings and jump from one topic to another, whatever's convenient for you. You can also, later in that portal, there's a search button. So I think I was using the example of selecting search and typing in the letters ARPA, which stands for American Rescue Plan Act, to see what the materials were for example, I know we've already had a work session sometime here in the month of January or February, where we discussed the ARPA program and next steps. So you can watch the recorded video of that meeting. You can look at the presentation material. It's all right at your fingertips and is part of our commitment to serving you in an open and a transparent manner. So you know what kind of decisions we're making, what goes into those decisions, and hear the discussion of us, your Board of Commissioners, right in those public meetings, doing that work for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Harrington, and thank you for explaining that, because I think it does really reflect the board's value of transparency by having that portal available. I'm going to pivot now to Brenda. Would you go ahead and share the questions that are remaining that people would like to have answered?
Sure. Let's pop back over to the first one that was typed in of the evening. We're seeing that the state has a surplus of income. Why is Washington County in a deficit?
Can I take that?
Please.
That's a really great question. Our state of Oregon gets a lot of its funds through income taxes. Whereas here in Washington County, this income taxes are taxes that we as employees pay on our wages, as well as businesses pay on their profits, and having workforces here in our state. County government, like city government and many special districts, is funded through an entirely different tax method. It's called property taxes. So every piece of land, whether it has a home, a business, an apartment building, you name it, it pays a property tax. And as Commissioner Willie mentioned earlier, here in our state, a measure was passed in 1990 called Measure 5, with there subsequently being additional restrictions. That means that those property taxes on an existing property can only increase 3% a year unless approved by voters, like bond measures and levies. If there is new development, so that's growth, new property tax assessment, that's what causes the county's property tax year over year, the last several years, has actually increased on average at a rate of 4%. But that's the only increase we get. So right now, due to our booming economy, our low unemployment rate, meaning our high employment rate, we have a lot of people working and making money, which is why the state revenue and income taxes is high. Whereas our county tax level is, it's been steady, but our revenue, our expenditures, due to those costs that Mr. Munn shared, our expenses, our cost of delivering services to you exceeds the revenue that we have to pay for those services, which is why Ms. Angie is going through this data collection and why we're hearing your input today, and we'll continue to through the process as we go through the difficult decision-making of how to bring balance to our service delivery and our expenditures to stay within our revenue resources. I hoped that answered the question.
That sounded great to me, Chair. Thank you so much. Brenda, what else do we need to address?
Let's go to Jody asked a question. Transferred in from SIP is 20% of general fund revenue, or about 54 million. Is that both taxes on the 100 million for each project and also fees, or only one of those? Will that SIP be dropping because Intel's 2005 SIP and Genentech are out of their SIP agreements?
I can answer that one. That is a great question. So the amount of SIP actually in the general fund, component of general fund revenue, is about 43 million. So we're pretty close there. And yes, it's includes the 100 million on each of the projects and also the fees. And the SIP for Intel's 2005 SIP and Genentech will be aging out soon, which is why we've had the conversation, and it's in one of these bullet points that I mentioned earlier, that we need to formulate a SIP policy moving forward so we manage that revenue. It is not a stream that's consistent like property taxes. It can come and go as agreements terminate. But that's a really a good point, and that's something the county's going to work on in implementing that as we move forward. Thank you for that question.
And I would just comment, Mr. Munn, that SIP is next level budget complexity. So we may have to have some of our participants do a little homework on their own to learn about the strategic investment program and how it benefits Washington County.
So
Okay.
Julie,
Yes.
while I see Greg has answered a question, there's another one that I think the ball's in his court. And that question is, how much would we get from utility franchise fees if we got them like the cities do? Is the county pursuing that?
We don't get utility franchise fees because we don't have utilities like cities do. But what I can say is that through this whole exercise of our budget review is initially we're really looking at our expenditures and making sure we're getting those, we're closing that gap and working on bringing those expenditures down to a level that matches our revenue. But the other side of the equation is revenue, and we will be looking at that as we move forward. And in a more of a long-term approach, what are some other revenue sources the county could look at to fund the services that we deliver to the public? So the short answer is no, we don't get a franchise fee, but we are looking at other revenue sources.
So thank you
If
for
I could
that, Greg.
expand on that a
Yep,
little bit.
Chair.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I think the person that asked it is a little bit in the know. For example, Comcast is a provider of a utility service in throughout Washington County, some parts of Washington County, such as in some of our cities, like the city I live in, the city of Beaverton. Well, there are also community members who get Comcast service in our urban unincorporated areas. And some of those service providers collect utility fees, franchise fees from all customers. So the amount they collect covers all of these areas, but they are only required by state law to return those franchise fees and share them to cities. They are not required to share them with counties for the urban unincorporated areas. So we haven't done research in a long time to find out what level of franchise fee revenue utilities such as that collect that is not remitted to counties. But I can tell you that years ago, before I was a member of the commission, this topic came up. There was much discussion, but it would take change at the state law through the legislature. And at that time, there wasn't the stomach for it. And, in my opinion, as a county commissioner, I don't think that situation has changed. But thank you very much for the question.
Thank you for your addition to the answer, Chair. That's really fascinating for a lot of us. Brenda, a couple more questions.
Couple more. Okay. We can go to, it's kind of similar, but are the budget surprises the result of systemic flaws? And have they been corrected? If so.
I think this question was posted before Mr. Munn went through his most recent explanation about revenues and the other factors in the subsequent slide that he talked about. I don't know if there's a way to check back in with that person, but I did notice that this question was posed before he presented that information that really gets to this question. But he may have something more to expand on as well.
Great.
Yeah, sure, I can expand on that just a little bit. I would just say that part of what we've been doing over the last 6 to 8 months is really looking at our budget processes and comparing those to the best practices looking forward. And one of the key things that we will be doing more and more as we move forward is making sure that our decisions that we're making have a financial component to those, that we know what the financial impacts are, not just in the next year's budget, but over the long run. So that the commissioners, chair and the commissioners, board of commissioners can be confident in the decisions they're making moving forward. So those are just some of the components of best practices in budgeting that we'll be implementing as we move forward that I think will really help us be forward-looking and will help us balance our budgets moving forward.
Thank you, Greg. And Brenda, let's have one more quick question to end this round of questions before we move on.
Okay. Okay, so Colleen asks, Multnomah County has passed countywide income taxes, for example, with preschool for all. Couldn't Washington County do the same?
I'd like to take that question. Your County Board of Commissioners discussed this topic. Oh, I can't remember if it was early in 2022 or in the latter part of 2021, because there was an effort scoping out preschool for all in Washington County. And the next step there was for the board to decide if we wanted to ask our county administrator to put resources into investigating what it might take. And there was not a vote, a majority of the commission that was required to weigh in on that topic. I know because I was on the losing side of that decision. That's why it sticks in my mind. So the board made a decision to not pursue participating further and dedicating Washington County resources to better understand what it would take for such a proposal to work and be implemented by your county government. Thank you for asking.
And Chair, correct me if I'm wrong, but that would take a vote of the community, correct?
Yes, but before we would entertain putting such a referral on the ballot through the county commission, we would first need to understand what would it mean for such a system to be put in place here in Washington County? What obligation and services and staffing would be needed at Washington County? And our choice through these 5 members was not to invest any county resources into answering doing the pre-work, so to speak, of what it would take. That's all.
Great. Thanks for clarifying that. And Commissioner Willie, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd kind of like to expand on that. The Preschool for All was going to be an initiative that would fund one particular segment of social services that we all agreed is a critical factor for our county. And although we'd love to be able to fund all of these different aspects of it, it's a little bit of a death by 1,000 cuts. And so there's only so much taxation that we can ask our constituents to support before we reach a point where they say, no, we're done with that. And so we have to look at providing what it takes to provide all of the services that are required by us as a county commission and as a county to provide the basic services for our county constituents. And I think what we're in the process of doing right now is defining what exactly those basic services are. And once we do that, then we move ahead to what additional services could we support and financially pay for. So this is a moving target. I believe that Multnomah County's Preschool for All project has not really proven itself to be successful so far. So we will wait to see how that works. But certainly as a county, we are much more focused on how do we provide the basic services that our constituents want, and then look forward to what other services we could afford.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. And Commissioner Therese, would you like to comment before we move on to the next section?
Yes, please. Thank you, Julie. While I agree with the comments that the chair made and the other comments that have been made, I want to call attention to the fact that I believe the question was really using preschool for all as an example. So, and that's an important piece of that question. We do need, as Commissioner Willie was saying, we need to look at our revenues and consider how they support our current county services and what we need to do, what the money that we need to have to provide those services. And I would think that the next step, if we were going to look at anything, would be an operating levy.
Thanks for noting that, Commissioner Treese. Okay, we're going to move to the next slide, please. And I will take, just in the last few minutes here, I'm going to review the budget development process and where we go from here. So as you recall, when Chair Harrington explained this earlier, we're currently in that blue section that represents the internal phase of budget development. The next major milestone is on April 27th, as you heard earlier, when the proposed balanced budget will be delivered to the Budget Committee and made public. Then the Budget Committee will hold a series of meetings in May, and members of the public are more than welcome to attend and make comments. And then in June, there'll be two key meetings, two public hearings to vote on whether one to approve the proposed budget and then to adopt the proposed budget. And next slide, please. And as I said, beginning April 27th, the proposed budget will be posted on the county website. And the easiest way to locate that is by going to the top of the page and clicking on priorities on that tab at the top, and then directly underneath that on the county budget, which will take you right to the information that you will need to review. So also, please be on the lookout for media releases, social media posts, newsletter articles between now and mid-June, because we are going to make a concerted effort to keep the public in the loop every step of the way. And then we can go to the next slide, which is another chance for Q&A. We're coming to the close of our evening. So I would say maybe, Brenda, is there one maybe burning question that maybe hasn't been addressed by the presentation so far that we could close out the question and answer period before we give the board a chance to say final words for the evening? You're muted, Brenda.
So close to going one whole meeting without stuck on that mute button. So this is referring to one of the slides that Greg had posted, I think, but how are those, in his section, how are the outcomes measured? And what if the outcomes are not positive or neutral? Seems like a perfect target to reduce expenditures. In other words, if outcomes are not positive, those services should be cut.
I can take that one, unless anybody else wants to. So this is a great question because it talks about, so what we've been talking about tonight is about budget. That's inputs. Those are investments we make, dollars we spend. But the question that this brings up here is what are the outcomes? What are the results of those expenditures, those investments? And this is really exciting because it's part of a much bigger strategic plan that I think I might have mentioned earlier, but if I didn't, and that's the question about setting the longer term direction for the county, reviewing our existing strategic plan, resetting our longer term direction as a county, and then through that process have a mechanism to measure the outcomes as they relate to our investments moving forward. And then have a circle back function that says, how are we doing with those outcomes, which gives us a chance to adjust our inputs as we move forward. So I think that's a great question, and I'm looking forward to that as we move into more of a strategic planning process coming up pretty soon.
Thank you, Greg. And I would just add as well that when you say outcomes, it makes me think of our budget equity tool that we haven't even touched on tonight. And in that context, we're really looking at outcomes related to equitable service delivery and making sure that all members of our community are well served by the services that we do provide.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Great. Well, with that, I think I will turn it back to our Board of Commissioners so they can say some parting remarks and send us off into the evening.
I'll start. It's Catherine, Chair Harrington. I want to say thank you very much for sharing your time tonight, your questions and your comments. We're very much in listening mode. And so we appreciate hearing from you, both your questions about how we're going about this internal process so that our county administrator and budget officer, Ms. Angie, can provide a balanced proposed budget to us by the end of April. And for us to then continue going through the public process and hear your comments at every single one of those 7 or 8 different meetings that we have coming up between the beginning of May and June 20th before we adopt whatever budget proposal we have at that stage. Your input, your questions, and your comments are important to us and does help shape our thinking. Thank you. We value your input as we do this work for you. We're all in service to you, our community. Thanks again. And now I'll turn it over to my district colleagues. Commissioners, any closing thoughts?
Sure, I'll go next, Chair Harrington, since my picture is right next to yours. This has been a really enlightening conversation, and thank you so much, Greg, for your succinct presentation. I feel like every conversation I have with you and Tanya about the budget, it's a forever changing element, I feel like, and every time I learn something new and gain a different perspective of how we're handling our budget situations. You know, it's no secret that the county faces financial challenges, and the county's already made some cuts within the general funds last year in the tune of 31 million. And to be, fair and honest and transparent, these reductions or challenges have direct impact to services, but not just services, but also to the people that deliver these services. And now we have an additional 25 million that we need to make cuts to. So I say this with the community and the people that tuned in, engage this conversation, reach out to us. We're very accessible, we're very transparent, and this is something that I think it's all new. I think the last 2 years has been a challenging year for Washington County in terms of the budget. And one of the constituents that asked about the question around the surprise element to this challenges, I would say in some ways it is true. This is a surprise, but didn't come out of nowhere. It has to do with some of the challenges and some of the situations that Greg talked about in his presentations. But I'm really excited to figure out how we can minimize the impact to our services, the impact to our employees and the people that deliver these services. And I'm committed, and I'm listening, and whatever advocacy and information or any questions that I can facilitate to answer, please know that I'm accessible and I'm on your side. Thank you, and I turn it to next person.
Thank you, Nafisa. you follow the pictures, I'll follow my picture and go next. So I just want to say thank you to all of the participants. This has been really a very interactive town hall, and that's how we all learn, and I greatly appreciate it. There were many really good comments in the chat. There were thought-provoking comments and things that I'm certainly going to take away and be thinking about as we go through this budget process. So I want to thank the participants. I want to encourage you to continue to participate. That is very, very helpful to us in this leadership role as we work for you, all of the residents of Washington County. Be safe, and I'll turn it over to Commissioner Willie.
Thank you, and I don't mind at all being cleanup hitter here. First of all, Julie, you've done a great job tonight, and so thank you for stepping in there. It's been very, very good, and certainly for Greg and Tanya, this is a tough discussion. So again, thank you for your homework on that. Greg, you did some great presentations and some good slides, and so I appreciate that. These are really, really hard decisions, obviously, that we're going through. It is not easy to cut services on any department. It's not easy to have conversations about reducing funding for libraries, public safety, land use and transportation, health and human services. All of these are very critical services that we provide. And this is a tough job to do this. So I just want to say thank you for all the staff that are working hard to provide budget reductions, and certainly understanding the impact that each one of those reductions will have on staffing and certainly the services they provide. You know, I heard the word surprise earlier. Was this a surprise? Well, was COVID a surprise? I could certainly say yes, it was. And the impact of the budget cuts that we're doing, yes, this was a surprise. But we started to anticipate and see this a couple of years ago, and we tried to take actions to at least mitigate the impact of that. We continue to do that. And then tonight there was a number of comments and questions that were made in the chat. I would encourage the person who was anonymously asking those questions to abide by the same rules that we do, and that is transparency. We have these town halls because we want to be transparent. We want community input. We don't want to make these decisions in a silo. So if you seriously want to ask these questions, come out behind the veil of anonymous and let's have a conversation. So thank you. Back to you.
Thanks, Commissioner Willie. Appreciate all your comments, and thank you everyone tonight for your time. We apologize that we did go over just a little bit, but we really value your contributions. Thank you for being flexible, also in light of our winter weather challenges. I'd like to give a special shout out to our interpreters. We couldn't have done this evening without you, as well as our technical support staff. So with that, be well and be safe, and good night.
Thank you, staff, too.